The morning of September 23, 2012, started like any other for search and rescue volunteer Mike Torrance. Coffee at 5:30 a.m., weather check at 6, gear inspection by 6:30. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. Missing hiker, female, 24 years old, last seen 3 days prior, on the Devil's Thumb Trail near Nederland, Colorado. Routine stuff for Boulder County SAR. Hikers went missing all the time in the Indian Peaks wilderness. Usually, they turned up cold, hungry, embarrassed, but alive. Mike loaded his pack into the truck, thinking this would be another successful rescue story he'd tell at the bar later. He'd been doing search and rescue for 12 years. He'd pulled lost hikers off ridgelines, out of ravines, from places they had no business being. The mountains were unforgiving, sure, but most people who got lost up here made it out. Most people. The staging area was already buzzing when Mike arrived. Sheriff's deputies, Forest Service rangers, fellow SAR volunteers, all gathered around a topographic map spread across a truck's tailgate. The missing hiker was Riley Chen, a University of Colorado graduate student in environmental science. She'd gone backpacking alone, planning a 4-day loop through some of the most stunning and treacherous terrain in the Rockies. Her roommate had reported her missing when Riley didn't show up for a department meeting on Friday. Riley never missed meetings. She was meticulous, organized, the kind of person who color-coded her camping gear and laminated her trail maps, not the type to just vanish. The search coordinator, Captain James Briggs, briefed the team. Riley's car had been found at the Brainerd Lake trailhead, right where she'd told her roommate she'd park. Her intended route was ambitious but not impossible. Up to Lake Isabel, over Apache Pass, down through the Devil's Thumb corridor, camping at designated backcountry sites. She had a permit. She'd filed a plan. She'd done everything right. But the weather had turned vicious on Wednesday night, September 19th. An early season storm had dumped 8 inches of snow above 11,000 feet. Temperatures had plummeted into the teens. If Riley had been caught above treeline when that storm hit, she would have been in serious trouble. Mike's team was assigned the northern sector, a stretch of terrain between Devil's Thumb Lake and the Continental Divide. It was gorgeous country on a clear day, all alpine lakes and granite peaks. But it was also a maze of false trails, loose talus, and sudden drop-offs. Easy to get turned around, especially in a whiteout. They started hiking at 8 a.m., calling Riley's name every few minutes, scanning for any sign of her passage. A footprint, a wrapper, disturbed vegetation, anything. The sun was bright now, the storm long past, but evidence of its fury was everywhere. Trees stripped of needles, new snow already melting into dangerous slush. Streams running high and fast with snowmelt. By noon, they'd covered 3 miles and found nothing. Other teams were reporting the same over the radio. No sign of Riley Chen anywhere along her intended route. That's when Mike started to worry. After 12 years of search and rescue, he'd developed an instinct for these things. Sometimes you just knew when a search was going to end badly. At 2:47 p.m., the call came over the radio that changed everything. Team 3 had found something near Crater Lake, a half-mile off Riley's intended route. Not Riley herself, but her backpack, or what was left of it. Mike's team redirected, hustling over rough terrain to converge on the location. The pack was wedged between 2 boulders at the base of a cliff band, torn open, contents scattered. Her tent was there, still in its stuffed sack, her food mostly intact, her water filter, her first aid kit, her extra layers. Everything you'd need to survive a storm, right there, abandoned. But something was wrong. The pack hadn't fallen. It had been placed there, deliberately stuffed into that crevice. And the damage to it wasn't from animals or weather. The straps had been cut with something sharp. Clean cuts, deliberate. Captain Briggs called for everyone to stop. This was no longer just a search and rescue operation. This was a crime scene. Mike stood there in the bright September sun, looking at that mutilated pack, and felt his blood turn cold. Riley Chen hadn't gotten lost in the storm. Something else had happened up here. Something that would haunt Boulder County for the next 12 years. Riley's body was found 6 hours later, September 23, 2012, just before sunset. A sheriff's deputy spotted a flash of color in a ravine 200 yards from where her pack was discovered. Red jacket, the same one described in the missing person report. The same one she was wearing in the last photo she'd posted to Instagram, smiling at the Brainerd Lake trailhead, ready for adventure. She was at the bottom of a 30-foot cliff. The initial assumption was obvious. A fall. Tragic, but not uncommon. Hikers slipped all the time, especially in storm conditions. Ice, wet rock, poor visibility. One wrong step and gravity did the rest. But as investigators rappelled down to recover her body, things didn't add up. Riley was an experienced hiker. She'd grown up in Washington State, spent summers backpacking in the Cascades. She knew how to handle mountain weather. She knew to stay away from cliff edges in a storm. And she was found in an area she had no reason to be in, well off her planned route. The coroner's preliminary examination at the scene raised more questions. While Riley had injuries consistent with a fall, there were other marks that seemed off. Bruising on her arms that looked defensive. Scratches that could have come from running through trees in the dark. The pattern of injuries suggested she'd gone over that cliff at speed, not slipped while hiking. Within 48 hours, the Boulder County Sheriff's Office had reclassified Riley Chen's death from accidental to suspicious. The serene wilderness of the Indian Peaks had become a crime scene spanning thousands of acres. And somewhere out there, possibly still in those mountains, was a killer. Before we dive deeper into this investigation, drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever hiked alone? What's the most remote place you've ever been? I'm curious, how many of you understand that particular vulnerability of being miles from help, dependent entirely on your own skills and judgment? Also, what time zone are you in? It's fascinating to think about people all over the world, learning about what happened in these Colorado mountains. Share your location below. Riley Chen was brilliant. That's the word everyone used. Brilliant. She'd graduated summa cum laude from UC Berkeley with a degree in ecology. She'd published research papers as an undergrad. She'd been accepted into CU Boulder's PhD program with a full fellowship. At 24, she was already making a name for herself studying climate change impacts on alpine ecosystems. Her parents, David and Lisa Chen, lived in Seattle. They'd immigrated from Taiwan in the 1980s, built a successful small business, raised 3 kids who all exceeded every expectation. Riley was the youngest, the star, the one who was going to change the world. She called them every Sunday without fail. She sent photos from her field work. She was planning to come home for Thanksgiving. Riley moved to Boulder in August 2012, just weeks before she died. She'd found a small apartment near campus, decorated it with plants she'd carefully researched for their air-purifying properties. She'd joined the graduate student hiking club, the campus environmental group, a weekly trivia team at a local brewery. She was building a life, making friends, finding her place. Her research focused on pika, those small, round-eared mammals that live in high-altitude rock fields. Climate change was pushing them higher and higher up mountains, running out of habitat. Riley spent hours observing them, documenting their behavior, trying to understand how they were adapting. She'd joke that she was becoming part pika herself, most comfortable above tree line. That September backpacking trip wasn't just recreation. Riley was scouting potential research sites for the following summer. She'd brought her field notebook, had plans to take soil samples, measure temperatures at different elevations. Even her vacation was purposeful, directed, meaningful. Friends described her as focused but fun. She could talk for hours about ecological systems, but she also loved bad reality TV. She made killer dumplings from her grandmother's recipe. She had an infectious laugh that could fill a room. She was terrible at poker, but played anyway. She was learning to play ukulele, badly, but enthusiastically. The backpacking trip was carefully planned because that's how Riley did everything. She'd studied weather patterns for weeks, chosen a window with stable conditions. She'd tested all her gear on day hikes. She'd even done a practice run of setting up her tent in the dark, just in case. Her roommate, Sarah, remembered watching Riley pack, everything organized in stuffed sacks, labeled with waterproof markers. But Riley had also been troubled by something in the days before she left. Sarah mentioned it to investigators later. Riley had seemed distracted, checking her phone more than usual, locking their apartment door, even when they were both home. When Sarah asked if everything was okay, Riley had laughed it off. Just stressed about school starting, she'd said. Normal new semester anxiety. Except Riley didn't get anxious about school. School was where she thrived. Something else was bothering her. Sarah remembered Riley mentioning she'd run into someone unexpected on campus. Someone from Berkeley she hadn't expected to see in Colorado. She didn't elaborate, changed the subject quickly. Sarah didn't push. She wished she had. On September 18th, Riley had driven to the mountains alone. She'd posted that photo at the trailhead, captioned, "Into the wild for a few days. See you Friday." She looked happy, excited, ready for adventure. Ready to do what she loved in the place she was learning to call home. Within 72 hours, she'd be dead, and it would take 12 years to figure out why. The investigation started immediately and intensively. The Boulder County Sheriff's Office, already stretched thin by the usual end-of-summer rescue operations, suddenly had a potential homicide in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. You can't knock on doors when there are no doors. You can't canvass for witnesses when the only witnesses are marmots and mountain goats. Detective Patricia Reeves took lead on the case. She'd worked homicides in Denver before moving to Boulder County for the mountain air and slower pace. So much for that. She stood at the cliff where Riley had fallen, looking down at the recovery team's marks, trying to understand what had happened here. The forensics were frustrating. The storm had washed away footprints, DNA evidence, any trace of another person's presence. The cliff edge showed signs of disturbance, but that could have been from Riley, from her attacker, or from the recovery team. The wilderness, which preserved some things perfectly, had erased others completely. The autopsy provided more questions than answers. Riley had died from injuries sustained in the fall. But there were those defensive wounds, bruises on her upper arms, like someone had grabbed her, scratches on her hands that could have come from fighting back. The medical examiner couldn't determine if she'd been pushed, had fallen while running, or had jumped to escape something worse. All three scenarios were possible. Investigators started with the basics. Who knew Riley was going to be in those mountains? She'd filed her backcountry permit. Public record. She'd posted on social media. She'd told friends, colleagues, her roommate. The list was actually quite long, but who would want to hurt her? Riley had no enemies that anyone knew of, no ex-boyfriends with grudges, no academic rivals, despite the competitive nature of graduate programs. She didn't have money worth stealing. Her research, while important, wasn't controversial or threatening to anyone's interests. Detective Reeves dug deeper. She pulled Riley's phone records, email accounts, social media history. Everything looked normal until about 2 weeks before her death. Then there was a pattern change. 3 calls from a number with a 510 area code, Berkeley area. The calls were short, under a minute each. Riley hadn't saved the number in her contacts. The number traced back to a burner phone, purchased with cash at a Oakland convenience store. Dead end. But it confirmed something. Riley had been in contact with someone who didn't want to be identified. Someone who'd taken precautions. Investigators interviewed everyone in Riley's graduate program. Her advisor, Professor Martin Cass, was devastated. Riley had been his most promising student. He'd already been planning to include her in a major grant proposal. Her fellow graduate students were shocked. They'd been jealous of Riley's intellect, sure, but in that respectful, motivating way. Nobody wished her harm. The hiking club members were questioned. Had anyone shown unusual interest in Riley? Had she mentioned feeling uncomfortable around anyone? The answers were all negative. Riley had seemed happy, integrated, safe. But then investigators talked to a Berkeley professor who'd been Riley's undergraduate advisor. He mentioned something interesting. Riley had testified in an academic misconduct case her senior year. Another student had been plagiarizing research, and Riley had discovered it, reported it. The student had been expelled. His name was Tyler Morrison, and according to Berkeley records, he'd been furious, had to be escorted off campus by security after threatening consequences for everyone involved. Detective Reeves felt the familiar tingle of a lead worth pursuing. Where was Tyler Morrison now? Records showed he'd left California after the expulsion. His last known address was in Denver, just 30 miles from Boulder. From where Riley had started fresh, from where she'd thought she was safe. Morrison had no social media presence, no digital footprint after leaving Berkeley. But Colorado DMV records showed he'd registered a vehicle in August 2012, just weeks before Riley's death. The address on the registration was for a cheap apartment complex in Westminster, halfway between Denver and Boulder. When investigators arrived at the apartment, Morrison was gone. The landlord said he'd paid through September, but hadn't been seen since the 20th, the day after Riley died. His apartment was mostly empty, just a mattress on the floor, some clothes, and a desk covered in printed papers. The papers were all about Riley, news articles about her research, screenshots of her social media, academic papers she'd published, an obsession documented in neat piles. But Morrison himself had vanished. His car was found abandoned at Denver International Airport, but there was no record of him taking a flight. He'd disappeared as thoroughly as if the mountains had swallowed him whole. The investigation had its suspect, but no way to find him. Tyler Morrison became one of Colorado's most wanted, his photo distributed nationwide. Tips came in from everywhere and nowhere. Someone thought they saw him in Portland. Someone else swore he was in Albuquerque. None of them panned out. As weeks turned to months, the case began to cool. The mountain snow that had complicated the initial crime scene returned with winter, burying any evidence that might have been missed. The trails Riley had hiked were covered in feet of snow. The cliff where she died became inaccessible until the following summer. Detective Reeves kept working, but other cases demanded attention. Boulder County averaged 2 to 3 homicides a year, plus all the other violent crimes that required investigation. Resources were limited. The Riley Chen case remained open, remained a priority in theory, but the daily investigative work slowed, then stopped. Riley's parents came to Boulder that first Christmas, met with investigators, visited the place their daughter had died. They stood in the snow near Devil's Thumb Lake, trying to understand how their brilliant, careful daughter had ended up at the bottom of a cliff. They left flowers that the wind immediately scattered. They left with no more answers than they'd come with. The case was cold. Tyler Morrison was in the wind, and Riley Chen was still dead. Let me pause here to ask, what would you do if you thought someone was following you into the wilderness? Would you continue your trip, turn back, change your route? There's no cell service in most of the Indian Peaks wilderness. No way to call for help. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're diving into one of the most shocking cold case resolutions in Colorado history, and you don't want to miss what comes next. Life in Boulder County moved forward, as it always does. New students arrived at CU. New hikers discovered the trails Riley had loved. New cases crossed Detective Reeves's desk. But some people couldn't move on. Sarah, Riley's roommate, graduated and took a job with the Forest Service. She requested placement in Colorado, she said, because she'd fallen in love with the mountains. The truth was, she couldn't leave without answers. Every time she hiked in the Indian Peaks, she thought about Riley. She looked for signs, evidence, anything that might have been missed. Professor Case continued Riley's research on pika populations. He dedicated papers to her memory, included her name as co-author on work she contributed to before her death. He established a scholarship in her name for graduate students studying climate change impacts on mountain ecosystems. It felt like the least he could do. Riley's parents aged in that sudden way grieving parents do. They flew to Colorado every September, held a small memorial at Brainerd Lake. They met with Detective Reeves, who had less to tell them each year. They donated to search and rescue organizations. They tried to find meaning in meaninglessness. The years accumulated. 2013, 2014, 2015. The case file grew dusty. New investigators inherited it, reviewed it, found nothing their predecessors had missed. Tyler Morrison remained missing. Some investigators theorized he'd killed himself, unable to live with what he'd done. Others believed he'd fled the country. Mexico, maybe, or Canada. Without resources to pursue international leads, it didn't much matter. Technology advanced. DNA analysis became more sophisticated. But there was no DNA to analyze. The storm had washed away biological evidence. The rocks and snow held no genetic secrets. The case remained frozen in time, as cold as the mountain peaks where Riley had died. In 2018, Detective Reeves retired. At her retirement party, she mentioned the Riley Chen case as the one that would haunt her, the one she'd failed to solve. Her replacement, Detective Alan Stokes, was young, eager, tech-savvy. He promised to take a fresh look at all the cold cases, Riley's included. But fresh eyes saw the same things. A suspect who'd vanished, evidence destroyed by weather, a trail grown cold as mountain stone. The 10-year anniversary approached in 2022. Local news stations prepared retrospectives. True crime podcasts reached out to investigators, to Riley's family, to anyone who might provide a new angle on the old story. Most declined to participate. What was there to say? A brilliant young woman had been murdered. Her likely killer had escaped. Justice had failed. But then, in late 2023, something unexpected happened. It started with a wildfire. The Pine Creek Fire started on July 15, 2024, in the Roosevelt National Forest, about 15 miles north of where Riley had died. Lightning strike in drought-dried timber. It burned for weeks, consuming 45,000 acres before October, snow finally killed it. The fire burned so hot it sterilized the soil, melted rocks, revealed things that had been hidden for years. After the fire was contained, Forest Service teams surveyed the damage. They documented destroyed trails, damaged infrastructure, areas that would need restoration. On August 3rd, a survey team working near Crater Lake, not far from where Riley's pack had been found 12 years earlier, discovered something unusual. In an area where the fire had burned away decades of duff and undergrowth, they found human remains, not recent remains. These bones had been there for years, protected by a rock overhang, preserved by the dry mountain air. The skulls showed signs of trauma. This person hadn't died peacefully. The remains were carefully excavated and sent to the coroner's office. DNA extraction from bones that old and weathered was difficult, but not impossible. It took weeks, but eventually they had a profile. The profile was run through missing persons databases, through CODIS, through every system available. The match came back on September 15th, 2024. The bones belonged to Tyler Morrison. He hadn't fled to Mexico. He hadn't started a new life under an assumed name. He'd never even left the mountains. He'd been dead almost as long as Riley, lying in a shallow grave less than a mile from where he'd killed her. But if Tyler Morrison had been dead for 12 years, who killed him? The revelation changed everything. Tyler Morrison hadn't escaped justice. Someone had delivered it. The investigation that had been cold for 12 years suddenly burned hot. Every assumption had to be reconsidered. Every witness had to be re-interviewed. The case wasn't just about who killed Riley anymore. It was about who killed her killer. The coroner determined Morrison had died from blunt force trauma to the skull. Multiple impacts with something heavy, probably a rock. He'd been hit from behind first, then repeatedly while down. It wasn't self-defense. It was execution. His body had been dragged to the overhang, covered with rocks and branches. Hidden deliberately, but not professionally. Someone had wanted him dead and gone, but hadn't known how to properly conceal a body. Detective Stokes pulled everything, every interview from 2012, every person who'd been on the mountain that week, every name in the search and rescue operation. Someone had been there. Someone had known or figured out what Morrison had done. Someone had taken justice into their own hands. The timeline was crucial. Morrison had killed Riley sometime on September 19th or early on the 20th. His car was found at the airport on the 22nd, but now investigators knew that was misdirection. He'd never made it off the mountain, so he'd been killed sometime between the 20th and 22nd, while search teams were still looking for Riley, before her body was even found. Who else had been in those mountains during that narrow window? The answer came from an unexpected source: trail cameras. In 2012, CU's biology department had been running a wildlife study in the Indian Peaks wilderness. They'd placed motion-activated cameras throughout the area to document animal movement patterns. The cameras had been retrieved weeks after Riley's death, the data archived and forgotten. Detective Stokes got permission to access that 12-year-old data. Most of it was useless: elk, deer, the occasional bear. But one camera, positioned near the junction of Devil's Thumb Trail and the spur to Crater Lake, had captured something interesting. September 20th, 11:47 p.m. A figure moving through the frame, heading toward Crater Lake. The image was grainy, infrared, but the person was carrying something. A large backpack, maybe, or a body over their shoulder. September 21st, 2:15 a.m. The same figure returning, no longer carrying the load. This time, the camera caught a partial face. Not enough for positive identification, but enough to see it was a man, Caucasian, beard, baseball cap. The build, the gait, the timing, it all pointed to someone specific. Someone who'd been there. Someone who'd had opportunity and maybe motive. Someone nobody had seriously considered 12 years ago because he'd been part of the solution, not the problem. Mike Torrance, the search and rescue volunteer who'd been there when Riley's pack was found, who'd stood in that bright September sun, looking at evidence of violence, who'd felt his blood run cold, who'd known those mountains better than almost anyone. When investigators arrived at Mike Torrance's cabin outside Nederland on November 3rd, 2024, they expected denial, flight, maybe violence. They found none of those things. Mike was sitting on his porch, cup of coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the Continental Divide. He saw the police cars coming up his dirt road and didn't run. He set down his coffee, stood up, and said 5 words that would shock the entire community. "I've been waiting for you." Quick question before we get to Mike's confession. Do you think vigilante justice is ever justified? When the system fails, when a killer might escape, is taking the law into your own hands ever the right choice? Drop your thoughts below. This is the kind of moral complexity that makes true crime so fascinating. Also, where are you watching from? City, state, country? I love knowing that people everywhere are learning about these Colorado mountains, these trails that hold so many secrets. Mike Torrance's confession was unlike anything Detective Stokes had encountered in his career. Mike didn't lawyer up, didn't deny anything. He sat in that interview room and told the story he'd been carrying for 12 years, like it was a relief to finally let it go. He'd been on the mountain the night of September 19th, but not as part of any search operation. He'd been doing what he often did on clear autumn nights, hiking alone, camping unauthorized in the backcountry he knew better than his own hometown. He loved the solitude, the silence, the stars undimmed by city lights. He'd been near Apache Pass when he heard something that didn't belong. Voices, angry voices, a man yelling, a woman screaming. In those mountains, sound carries weird. It could have been coming from anywhere, but Mike knew the acoustic patterns. He triangulated, moved toward the sound, careful to stay quiet. What he saw, illuminated by headlamps near the cliff edge, changed him forever. A young woman, Asian, small, was backing away from a man. The man was advancing, something in his hand. Maybe a knife, maybe just a sharp rock. The woman was pleading, trying to reason. The man wasn't listening. He grabbed her. They struggled. She broke free, ran toward the cliff edge. Maybe she thought she could traverse along it, find another way down. Maybe she wasn't thinking at all, just reacting. The man pursued, caught her at the edge. They fought. Mike was still 50 yards away, moving as fast as he could over rough terrain, when he saw her go over. He couldn't tell if she was pushed or fell trying to escape, but he heard the impact. That sound, he told Detective Stokes, never left him. The sudden silence after was worse. The man stood at the cliff edge for a moment, looking down. Then he turned, and Mike saw his face in the moonlight. Young, mid-20s maybe. Panicked. The man grabbed the woman's pack, started rifling through it, pulled out her phone, threw it over the cliff, started to leave, then came back, grabbed the pack, and ran into the darkness. Mike had a choice: follow the killer or check on the victim. He chose the victim. Rappelled down to where she'd fallen. She was dead. Obviously, immediately dead. There was nothing he could do for her. But the man who'd done this was still out there. Mike climbed back up and tracked him. 12 years of search and rescue had taught him to read signs in the landscape. Disturbed vegetation, partial footprints, the subtle trail every human leaves. The killer was moving fast but sloppy, panicked, not trying to hide his trail. Mike caught up with him near Crater Lake. The man had stopped, was trying to stuff the woman's pack into a crevice between boulders. Mike watched him cut the straps with a knife, tear through the contents, looking for something. Whatever it was, he didn't find it. Mike made another choice. He picked up a rock. The first blow dropped Morrison. He never saw Mike coming. Should have stopped there, Mike admitted. Morrison was unconscious. Could have been tied up, turned over to authorities. But Mike stood over this man who'd just murdered an innocent woman, and he brought the rock down again and again, until he was certain Morrison would never hurt anyone else. Then came the cover-up. Mike dragged Morrison's body to a hidden spot he knew from years of hiking, covered it with rocks and branches, took Morrison's car keys, wallet, phone, hiked out in the darkness, drove Morrison's car to the airport, left it in long-term parking, took the light rail back to Boulder, walked to where he'd left his own vehicle, was back home before dawn. When the call came in days later about a missing hiker, Mike volunteered for the search like he always did. He helped find Riley's pack, knowing exactly where it would be. He stood with the search team, played his part, kept his secret. He attended Riley's memorial. He watched her parents grieve. He said nothing. For 12 years, he said nothing. Detective Stokes asked the obvious question: why? Why not report Morrison? Why not claim self-defense or defense of another? Mike's answer was simple and devastating. I didn't trust the system to get it right. Morrison was white, from a connected family. Riley was Asian, alone on the mountain. Mike had no physical evidence, just his word about what he'd seen. Morrison could claim Riley had fallen accidentally, that he'd panicked and run. Reasonable doubt was everywhere. And if Morrison walked, he'd kill again. Mike was certain of that. So Mike became judge, jury, and executioner on that mountain. He carried the weight of two deaths, one he'd witnessed, one he'd caused. He never married, couldn't burden someone else with his secret. He kept volunteering for search and rescue, saving lives to balance the one he'd taken. He visited Riley's memorial spot every year, left flowers when no one was watching. He'd thought Morrison's body would never be found. The mountains were vast, hiding places infinite. But fire reveals what time conceals. The Pine Creek fire had exposed more than burned forest. It had exposed the truth. Mike was charged with voluntary manslaughter, not murder. The DA recognized the complicated nature of the case. Here was a man who'd killed to stop a killer, who'd hidden a body but saved dozens of lives in the years since. The community was divided. Some called Mike a hero. Others said vigilante justice was still murder. Most didn't know what to think. Riley's parents were contacted. After 12 years, they finally knew exactly what had happened to their daughter. Tyler Morrison had stalked her to Colorado, followed her into the mountains, confronted her about the Berkeley expulsion. When she'd refused to recant her testimony, he'd attacked. She'd died defending herself, trying to escape. And then her killer had been killed by a stranger who couldn't let him get away with it. It wasn't the closure they'd imagined, but it was closure. Mike Torrance was released on bail, awaiting trial. The community that had trusted him with their safety during search and rescue operations now had to grapple with what he'd done. The heroic volunteer who'd saved lost hikers had also been a killer, walking among them for over a decade. The trial was set for March 2025. Legal experts predicted Mike would likely serve time, but not die in prison. Voluntary manslaughter with extenuating circumstances carried a sentence of 3 to 12 years in Colorado. With good behavior and his service record, Mike might be out in 5. He was 59 years old. He'd have some life left after justice was served. But the real verdict had to be decided by each person who heard the story. Was Mike Torrance a hero or a criminal? Was his vigilante justice justified or just another crime? Had he saved future victims or simply added to the violence? The mountains held no opinion. They stood as they always had, beautiful and indifferent, keeping their secrets until wind or fire or time revealed them. The trails Riley had hiked were still there, worn deeper by 12 more years of boots. The pika she'd studied still chirped from their rocky homes, adapting to a warming world. The cliff where she'd died looked exactly the same. In the end, 3 people had entered those mountains in September 2012. None had left unchanged. Riley Chen, brilliant and ambitious, had been murdered at 24. Tyler Morrison, obsessed and violent, had been killed at 27. Mike Torrance, heroic and haunted, had become a killer at 47. The Colorado mountains had witnessed it all and held their silence for 12 years. Now the truth was out, as shocking as the community had feared, as complex as real justice always is. Riley Chen deserved to live. She deserved to finish her doctorate, continue her research, maybe save those pika populations she cared so much about. She deserved to call her parents every Sunday, make dumplings from her grandmother's recipe, learn to play ukulele well instead of badly. She deserved the life she was building in Boulder, the future she was working toward, the change she wanted to create in the world. Tyler Morrison took that from her. Mike Torrance took justice into his own hands. The system took 12 years to uncover the truth, and a community was left to grapple with questions that have no clean answers. Some stories end with clear resolution, obvious heroes and villains, justice served neat and clean. This isn't one of those stories. This is a story about what happens when the system fails, when good people make terrible choices, when the mountains keep secrets better than any human ever could. Riley's scholarship continues. Every year, a new graduate student receives funding to study climate change impacts on mountain ecosystems. They hike the same trails Riley hiked, observe the same pika populations, carry forward the same mission. They probably don't know the full story of the woman whose name is on their checks. They probably shouldn't. Some truths are too heavy for young shoulders. Mike Torrance awaits trial in his cabin outside Nederland. He still drinks coffee on his porch, still watches sunrise over the Continental Divide. He knows what's coming. He's made his peace with it. He saved lives for 12 years after taking one. The math doesn't balance, he knows that. But he sleeps better now that the truth is out. The Indian Peaks Wilderness remains one of Colorado's most beautiful and dangerous places. Hikers still get lost. Search and rescue teams still mobilize. The mountains still don't care about human drama. They endure, impassive and eternal, keeping new secrets, even as old ones are revealed. If you've made it this far, you understand the true crime isn't entertainment. It's tragedy. It's complexity. It's human failure and human resilience tangled together in ways that can never be fully separated. Share this story if it moved you. Subscribe if you want to hear more cases that challenge simple narratives. Comment with your thoughts on justice, vigilante, or otherwise. Tell me where you're watching from, what mountains are near you, whether you've ever been afraid in the wilderness. Riley Chen was 24 years old when she died. She'd been in Colorado for 6 weeks. She was studying pika to understand climate change. She made dumplings and played ukulele badly and called her parents every Sunday. She mattered. She still matters. Tyler Morrison was 27 when he died. He was angry about consequences he'd earned. He tracked a woman across state lines to confront her. He killed her when she wouldn't give him what he wanted. He discovered that mountains have their own justice. Mike Torrance is 59 and waiting for trial. He saved dozens of lives. He took one life. He kept a secret for 12 years. He proves that heroes and villains are often the same person, separated only by perspective and circumstance. The Colorado mountains remember everything and judge nothing. They're still there, beautiful and terrible, offering adventure and danger in equal measure. They keep their secrets until they don't. They remind us that nature is indifferent to human ideas of justice. But we're not indifferent. We seek truth. We demand answers. We want stories to make sense, even when they don't, especially when they don't. Riley Chen deserved better. Her parents deserved answers sooner. The community deserved the truth. Mike Torrance deserved what? That's for each of us to decide. Rest in peace, Riley. Your research continues. Your memory endures. Your story, finally, has been told. The mountains are waiting. They always are.